the solution to some of the problems facing woke universities and basic academic settings, college campuses, and whatnot. Here's what I don't want, and here's what I fear, and here's where I will challenge some of you today. House GOP Conference Chair Elise Stefanik challenged these several college presidents during this hearing, which has now become somewhat famous or infamous, depending on your point of view. She has now slammed Harvard's decision that they made yesterday to stand behind Harvard President Claudine Gay, despite her testifying last week at a congressional hearing that calls for genocide on the Jews require context before they would violate the school's code of conduct policy. Context. Now, the big difference, the debate in my mind is whether or not a general call for genocide equates a direct call to action for violence. I would argue it does. I would argue if you're yelling and screaming about genocide, then you are calling on violence against a certain group of people, and you're dehumanizing those people in the process. But I am also a fierce defender of free speech. I am in the free speech business. Ultimately, it's what we do. It is, frankly, our Bill of Rights and the ideas that the Founding Fathers determined that they needed to set in stone to make sure that no one would be confused at any point in the future. You know, there was an argument against the Bill of Rights, and I forget who made it, and one of you on the super text line will remember. There was an argument to be made during the time that the Constitution was being constructed that the Bill of Rights was ridiculous because the Bill of Rights was unnecessary. And I can't remember who made the argument. I don't think it was Madison, who was the primary author of the Constitution of the United States, but one of our founding fathers made the argument, and I'll look it up, that we have set down what the government is allowed to do. It is naturally assumed that if we do not give the government specific and direct authority to do certain things, that the government does not have the authority to do these things in our lives. So
it was Madison.
Was it Madison that made the argument? But there were others that argued, Jefferson among them, that we better set these things down on the record in our Constitution of the United States of America, lest they be forgotten by future generations and lest the government of the United States of America begin to encroach on our basic freedoms and liberties that come to us from God, not from government. This is where I want to start, because I see a lot of people demanding that Harvard get shut down or that Harvard get punished in some way. Harvard is what Harvard is. And Harvard has lost moral high ground by not clearly and distinctly understanding the history of the Jewish people, and obviously how that carries forward to today, and how the call for genocide specific to the Jewish population would be akin to calling on slavery for the black population. Do you think that they would put up with that for a moment? So for me, it's not a matter of speech. It's a matter of picking winners and losers on the campus of Harvard and some of these other elitists on university campuses around the United States of America. So we have the ability to condemn that speech which they allow, which is right and proper. What I hesitate to do and what concerns me about this conversation are there are some that suggest that we should go further by demanding that government punish what is ultimately a private institution. Harvard is a private learning institution. Now, if I gave money to Harvard, which I don't, I wouldn't any longer. I mean, with speech and with action comes consequences. This is the manner in which we should be handling this. Not through force of government. Government's the problem. They're not the solution to our problems. Not always. Every so often, if there's a direct violation of human rights and whatnot. Now, free speech has its limits. And we discuss those limitations often on our show because we're in the free speech business. Obviously, there are limitations about what you can and cannot say if you're putting people in direct harm's way. If your actions, or more to the point, your speech is creating an atmosphere by which there's going to be a riot, by which your health and safety is endangered directly, then that's a problem. What I don't like to see, because liberals love to do this, they love to shut down. They suggest, for years they've suggested a shutting down of talk radio because of the same type of activity. They would tell you the same type of activity that's going on the campuses of Harvard goes on talk radio. They look at it differently, and it's a different context. And obviously, I don't agree with them, but that's their argument for shutting us down. So I do believe that there's a danger here in overstepping and trying to play in an arena that goes against the basic fabric of the Constitution to begin with. You don't beat them by becoming them, is my point. And while, for the most part, I've not seen this conversation turn in that way, I fear that it will. Taking a point of personal privilege at the top of the House Republican Conference press conference, I said that correctly, the House Republican Conference press conference, Elise Stefanik ripped the, quote, complete moral failure of Harvard's leadership, saying that in allowing Gay to remain as president, the only update in the code of conduct that the Ivy League school has made after the hearing is to allow a plagiarist as the president of Harvard. That's a much more egregious offense in my estimation. There's a reason why the testimony at the Education and Workforce Committee garnered 1 billion views worldwide, and it's because those university presidents made history by putting the most morally bankrupt testimony into the congressional record, and the world saw it. As a Harvard graduate, I'm reminded of Harvard's motto, Veritas, which goes back, it's older than the founding of our country. It goes back to the 1640s. In addition, the motto was Veritas Christo et Ecclesiaste, truth for Christ and the church. I may have mispronounced the Latin for Ecclesiastes. Larry Summers, who was president of Harvard when I was an undergrad, talked about the meaning of Veritas as divine truth or moral truth. Let me be clear. Veritas does not depend on the context. It's a moral failure of Harvard's leadership and higher education leadership at the highest levels. And the only change they have made to their moral conduct, or their code of conduct, I should say, where they failed to condemn calls for the genocide of the Jewish people. The only update to the code of conduct is to allow plagiarists as the president of Harvard. That's Elise Stefanik. I don't believe that Elise Stefanik goes so far as to call for some sort of shutdown or whatnot of Harvard. Individuals can make their own decisions about how they feel about these things. It is clear to me that there is a failure, but I've known that along Ivy League campuses for years. I'm glad that more are just learning that they are not engaged in necessarily teaching open-mindedness and free and open debate. They are the thought police on these Ivy League college campuses. And you learn fairly early on, and I've talked to enough people who have been on them recently, you learn fairly early what to say, what you're allowed, what thought you're allowed, what thought you're not allowed, where you're allowed to go, what you're not allowed to say. They've become, simply put, institutions of wokeness. And this is a byproduct of that. It is a sad testimony that you cannot use the courage of your conviction if you are the president of Harvard University or any other college or institution of higher learning and say simply, emphatically, and without reservation that calling for the genocide of any people is bullying and harassment by definition of those people. And if your code of conduct dictates that you cannot bully nor harass, then you cannot bully nor harass. And it would be obviously an expellable offense. But she can't say that because she's afraid of pissing off these pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas supporters here in the United States of America and there on the campus of Harvard and Cambridge, Massachusetts. Free speech is completely lost when we adjust to that which we say publicly based on fear of how it will be received by others. And so in that spirit, I'm more saddened for Claudine Gay than anything, except that I don't believe for a moment that she wants to condemn genocide. And that is more of an embedded and infectious issue with Harvard that Harvard needs to deal with. I mean, would you send your kid there? Would you spend that amount of money sending your child to be indoctrinated into the ways of wokeness, DEI, and liberalism? Now, I can condemn it till the cows come home, this hour, next hour, and for the rest of time, and will. But it is a step too far in my mind to suggest that somehow there should be a force of government to shut them down. Now, where their mission butts up against government taxpayer dollars, that's a question that we need to address. I do not believe that they take any taxpayer money directly as a subsidy. But if they do, it needs to be shut down. Should have been shut down a long time ago. I don't believe that that's the case. And anyone giving to Harvard, alumni and otherwise, I would strongly encourage you to relook at your giving. Because they simply do not seem to represent the values that I would think you would want to represent. Values that all people matter, that individuals matter, that they should be free of this level of bullying and intimidation, to the point that you have groups of people on college campuses calling for the genocide of other groups of people. And it gets a little trickier when you start talking about from the river to the sea. They like to hide their language. They like to hide their point in language.
Did not.